Welcome back to the channel, everyone. I appreciate you joining me. This is part 6 of the Gundam Beginner's Guide. Thanks for joining. New, be sure to go and check out the other parts. This will be the ongoing, and I'll be going over the Big 5 in detail in this video. And for those of you who don't know, the Big 5 are the Big 5 Gundam kits in the main lines that most people know about and are the most popular. First off, SD, which means super deformed, for those of you who are wondering. This is the first of the Big 5. Now, Bandai wants you to start with these. You're probably asking why. This is because their main target for these particular kits is kids. If you get them when they're young, hopefully they'll become a lifelong customer and buy them for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, however long they live. SD Pros. Small, they're cute, easy to build, which is great for kids. You don't really need any sharp objects or tools like you do for the other kits, but you probably should build the first few with them when they're really young. I wouldn't suggest leaving it to themselves until they're about 5 or so, because you can pull them off the runner usually a lot easier than the other kits, and they don't usually break. It takes a lot of force to actually break them when you rip them off the runner, but they're designed to be pulled off the runner instead of clipped, so they're usually pretty good at that, but sometimes they still break. They're cheap. You can get these kits in Japan sometimes for as low as like $5, well, equivalent to $5. Unfortunately, in America, they're a little bit more than that. Sometimes around $8 to $10, $12. They're still pretty cheap, but in general, they're going to be a little bit more. And this is true for all the kits because, of course, it was imported from Japan, so it immediately makes it more expensive to purchase. One of the best things about them, though, is that there are tons of them to choose from. Lots of choices. You have tons of different lines of model kits to choose from. It's great. And those are really the best ones. These are great for all kinds of things. You can use these for decoration in your office if you want to. They don't take up much desk space, so they're great for that. Cons. The biggest cons to these, though, is that they're not accurate to the proportions of the suits in the show. Sometimes even the other grades have a harder time with it, but they look more realistic because of their proportions. But these aren't really meant to be. So even though I understand why people don't like that particular aspect of them, and some people do, I have to put it as a con because a lot of people say that it is. And I can see how that could be a con to people. Hollow parts. This is a big issue where one side of a part will be like the normal looking plastic that you're used to seeing for all the others, and then the inside is completely empty. Like it's not filled in with other plastic. It's just hollow. So it looks really cheap, but that's because it is. Stickers. Now the SDs are the worst about stickers because they're small and they don't have as much detail, which is another con. They're not very detailed. They will have usually a lot of color correcting stickers. Now, color correcting stickers are usually the foil stickers that you see in the boxes, but SDs typically have larger sheets of these because there's so many parts that aren't printed in the correct colors, because it would be cheaper to just make a sticker to cover it up instead of, actually making the part the correct color. This is usually due to the fact that one part of it is a different color and the other part's a different one. And this usually means that they'll print it in one color and give you a sticker to cover up half of that part to make it look more accurate. It kind of sucks, but that's just how it is. And another one, of course, is their very limited amount of articulation. They have very few joints, so they can't move a whole lot. There is another type of SD that they've created called the cross silhouette that gives you a slightly bigger skeleton. So it makes it a little taller and it gives it more range of movement and a little bit more joints. I think it gives it a knee joint, but it's still hella limited. So the main purpose of high grades is that they're mostly for your casual builder. They're just complicated enough to where they're fun to build, but they're not so hard to where you really need to know what you're doing. They're also for beginners, people who want to get more hardcore into it, but they're a little older usually, and they want something that looks, they want to start with something that's more accurate to how it looks in the show, like the proportions are more correct. So that's pretty much their purpose. These are basically the main bread and butter of the entire kit existence. High grades are the most, they're not necessarily the most popular when it comes to how much they're loved, but they all are the most popular when it comes to how many they sell. They sell they sell a lot of them. Pros. They're cheap. Not as cheap as SDs, but they're still pretty cheap. In Japan, they average around 10 to 15 to 20-ish dollars. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less. In America, though, they are a little bit higher. They average around 20 to 25, sometimes up to 30, sometimes more and sometimes less. But they have a wide array of choices. There's so many to choose from, but it's not surprising when high grades are basically the oldest form of Gundam kit when it comes to the Big Five. It started in 1990, after all. It has a pretty good amount of detail compared to the SDs, but this is basically the baseline that you should expect for all of the kits going forward. So its detail is decent for its grade, and some of them are better than other high grades, of course. This is definitely something that happens within every grade, but the baseline kits are usually pretty good. They're not great by any means. There's usually a lot of just flat pieces of plastic with very little dimension. But this is to be expected for a kit that you only paid $20 for. I mean, come on. They still have some hollow parts, which kind of suck. It's definitely something that I feel by this point is still acceptable because they are still pretty cheap, but it sucks whenever hollow parts end up in some of the higher graded kits. A decent amount of articulation. They're not the best because they don't have full inner frames. They only have partial frames. So you only build the frames for the neck, the arms, and the knees. And that's all you build the frames for. High grades were technically the first ones to have full inner frames back in 1990, but they stripped them out to make it cheaper for not only them to produce, but also the customer to purchase if they wanted that particular grade to be the baseline model, which is what they did. So it definitely limits articulation. Some are way better than others, and it really comes down to the engineering. It's still a starter kit, which means it can't typically stand up to the other grades. So from now on, this is just the baseline. Like SDs were obviously meant as a kid starter kit, but these are meant for like older people to start with and older kids. So they're better than SDs, and these are the baseline of what to expect from them, from the whole Big Five. And finally, the last con is compared to the other graded kits. The problem is that high grades still have a decent amount of stickers. Now, again, remember, stickers are the foil stickers that are used as usually cheap fixes to something that they didn't do during the engineering process. Typically, this means that that particular kit may have a lack of color separation. Now, color separation is, like I said before, is when one part is supposed to have multiple colors, but instead they'll print the part in one color and then give you a sticker to cover up the other half to make it more accurate. And this is not something that you have to do all the time with high grades. It's not the most common thing with them, but it is common enough to where I think I should mention that the stickers are still used as cheap replacements for a better engineered suit. Basically, they could have done better. Sometimes the stickers are used for detail instead of color separation, but even then, that's still kind of cheap, and they still could have used a separate plastic part to achieve the same effect. The only time I feel that stickers are okay is for the eyes. And that's really the only time a sticker is okay, in my opinion. You can always paint these details in, but, that can be difficult for some people. So if you don't want to do that, you have stickers. Third up on the list is going to be the RG, which for those of you who don't know what it means real grade. Its purpose is to give collectors or builders who don't have a whole lot of space in their living situation, say they live in a small apartment. RGs are the best mixture of both worlds. It gives you the height of a high grade, which is only about 6 inches, so they're not too big. But it also gives you the detail of a master grade and sometimes even the quality of a perfect grade, depending on the kit. RGs are really detailed. I mean, really detailed. And this is their main purpose, is to be something for collectors who don't want to spend tons of money on higher quality kits that are really big. These are smaller kits that have almost the same amount of detail. And this is going to go into the pros of the kits. The pros are that they have way more detail than high grades, just way more articulation as well. This is usually down to the fact that RGs have inner frames. Now, this is amazing because for the longest time, it was really hard for an inner frame to work in a kit of that scale. Even some of the earliest high grades that had inner frames, they didn't work too well. Even though they had great articulation, they were just really finicky. Well, real grades, eventually got better, and the inner frames are really well done. It's basically taking what a master grade has and shrinking it down to a smaller kit. And they're on the cheaper side still. This is usually, I consider them on the cheaper side because they're below $50 on average. Your regular real grade will cost around $30 to $40. Sometimes they're more expensive, upwards of $50 to $60. And sometimes they're cheaper, usually on the lower end of $25 to $28, but usually no lower than that. This is usually because of the quality difference. Some of the earlier real grades that were more experimental, well, they didn't do as good, but we'll get to that in a second. This is also where some of the water slides begin. It's not too common. Water slides in general are very rare for Gundam kits, which are some of the most beautiful decals you can see that come in a box. But they can be a little bit more, finicky and troublesome for most people, so Bandai tends to not use them, and they give you sticker-style decals, which are stickers, but they're not foil stickers. These are meant to add detail, and sometimes they're okay. Um, they also usually, instead of having just sticker style, they'll have like a rub-on style where you rub it into the plastic, and it gets rid of that clear foam. But the sticker style, the clear foam stays on the plastic, and you can't just rub it in until it disappears. And water slides kind of start here, but very few real grades have water slides. But they do have a lot more decals, which, if you're someone who loves to detail your kits, which a lot of, hardcore collectors who want the most realistic looking, models tend to do, these are great ways to add in detail without having to paint it, because that can be painstakingly tedious. Now we have the cons. Oh boy. For one, they have a lack of choice. You have very few options. This is not surprising though. Real grades only came out in 2009, which is just a little over, 11 or 10 years ago. It seems like a long time, but when you're talking about a product where only a handful of kits come out every month or every year, it's not too surprising that there's not a huge quantity of them. Now, there's obviously way more than there was back in 2009, but the point is that real grades in and of themselves have very few choices. We're upwards of about 80 or so kits now, which is still pretty good in choice, but there's still tons of kits that people would love to see in the high grade quality, in the real grade quality, but are unfortunately not in it just yet, or probably won't happen. So here is where you start running into the problems with the higher grades. Their biggest problem is lack of choice. This is the thing that I wanted to highlight in the first two grades, because yes, they're not as good, but you have way more choices, and you can usually complete an entire set of suits from one show with high grade or SD. You can't usually do that with real grade or the other ones. So for this one, it's kind of excusable because it's the newest. But in another 5 or so years, you give it a couple more years, and it probably won't have that excuse to lean on anymore. Well, let's give it 20 years. So another 10 years, if there still isn't a huge variety, it's not a good excuse anymore for that to be a reason. The problem is that the biggest issue for especially the early rail grades is the incredible delicacy of the plastic. Now, model kits in general are known to be delicate because they're not meant to be played with, they're meant to look at. And they are, they have some gimmicks you can do to like pose them in different ways and stuff, but you're not meant to constantly fiddle with them and constantly remove parts and put parts on. That causes things to degrade, and eventually that can cause breakage. So you don't want to do that. The problem is that high grades and master grades are usually pretty damn high quality when it comes to the plastic. They're pretty rugged. They can take a pounding and not break. For a model kit, they still break, obviously, but they're way more sturdy than your typical model kit. You could give, a high grade to a kid and let them actually play with it, and it might survive. I said might, but, it has a higher chance of surviving. You give a kid a real grade, it's going to break in the first 5 minutes, because basically real grades are meant to be posed one time and never touch them again. It kind of sucks because they look so good, but unfortunately, moving them, especially some of the earlier kits, really sucks because their inner frames haven't been fully mastered yet. So they're really susceptible to breakage or just poor engineering. And some of them, around 2012 is when the real grades really start to get good. when it comes to the quality, but they're still really delicate no matter what decade or year the kit came out in. They're just not as tough as some of the other kits. But this is probably what you get when you sacrifice when you give a lot of detail on a small scale. You probably sacrifice the toughness of the plastic. That's what I think, anyways. So just be really careful with them. And that's pretty much all of the major cons with real grades. Honestly, you mostly get nothing but pros with these kits. The biggest problems is breakage and lack of choice. So, moving on to the next one. MG, or Master Grade, is what it stands for. Its purpose is to be the baseline for hardcore collectors who don't care too much about price, that they can afford it and also have more living space. They may have a bigger home, so they can afford to buy more master grades than real grades or high grades. The pros to it, of course, is that, well, it's bigger, which means you have way more detail opportunities. Like, the internal frames for master grades are detailed heavily with, like, clearly what could be a different color to indicate caution, or pistons, or just whatever, vents and all kinds of things. There's lots of detail in just the frame, let alone the armor. And then, of course, you have better articulation because you have a bigger, more powerful inner frame, so it can move, more freely and has better posability than like a high grade would. So basically, it's on par with a real grade. It's just bigger. But the great thing about them, though, of course, is also gimmicks. Being able to do things like open up the cockpit and actually seeing a pilot figure, because these do come with pilot figures, but they usually come with two. They have one that's standing up and one that's sitting down, and you put that one in the chest. And both of them are usually in one color, so you'd have to paint them. It'd be really hard to do color separation on a really small pilot figure, so it's excusable in my opinion. Real grades also come with pilot figures, but they're only the standing up variant. So even if a real grade has a gimmick where the uh, cockpit can open up, there's nobody inside it. So, whatever. Not a big deal. Obviously, high grades don't come with them, but here they do. And they're usually pretty detailed. You just have to paint them. And that's really the only downside to them, and personally, when it comes to the figures. But, you know, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. You see, the cons for master grades are still pretty big. For one, of course, would also be its size. See, it may be a benefit, but it's also a con, because if you live in a smaller place, a bigger model kit, even slightly bigger than high grades, take up a little bit more space. So you'll automatically have less space the more master grades you get. Um, and of course, another big one would be money. These are way more expensive than the ones we've talked about so far. So, like, on average, just a regular Gundam will cost around 50 to 60, 70, $80. Uh, a grunt suit will be anywhere between 40 to 60, and that's still pretty expensive. But master grades, can get into the hundreds depending on which one you're getting. So, price is definitely more of a factor with these guys. Their biggest con is that they will cost you way more than a real grade or high grade. They are worth it, of course, but they're just more expensive, so you might want to think twice before you buy one. Another big problem or con with them is that they have lack of choice. Even though they came out only about 5 years after high grades, they're way more expensive to produce and purchase for the customer. So Bandai only makes ones that they believe will sell, because they don't want a bunch of master grades sitting in warehouses that aren't selling anywhere. Because of this, they only make certain suits in master grade, and sometimes a suit will not get a master grade for a decade. You would think that, like, for example, all of the hero character suits will get master grade versions of Double O, Gundam Double O back in 2007, but it took 13 years for us to get the other suits. So that, in my opinion, is obviously a problem with the master grade line. Price equals lack of choice. There's obviously a lot more than with real grade because they've just been around longer, but still, they do have a lack of choice. And that's pretty much all the cons, mainly. Just bigger, taking up more space, way more in the cost department. They charge, you get charged more, and they have less choice to pick. So that's the biggest ones. Uh, they also do have eh, a few more pros I forgot to mention is that they can also have lights, like light gimmicks and water slides. Water slides are more popular or more possible with master grades, but this is pretty much the only grade that ever has them. You would think it would be a later grade, but it's not. And water slides are really popular with hardcore builders and detailers and big fans because they look better on the kit than the rub-on style decals or the sticker style decals, which are more common with all the grades. PG, which for those of you who don't know, means perfect grade. The purpose of this is to be the top of the line for the main line of kits. This is for the biggest collectors, the biggest fans, and the most, insane builders who want really awesome, just huge kits. Um, and, you have to have the money to do it as well. The pros. They're the biggest kits of the big five. Their scale is 160 scale, so they're big. They have insane amount of detail, lots of decals. They look so good when they're completed. They are beautiful, and these have a lot more gimmicks as well, around the same that master grades do. Cockpits open, other panels and stuff open, tons of things can slide and move, and then of course you have things that might even light up, and sometimes the lighting gimmick might go through the entire suit and not just the eyes. It's super impressive. But there's a lot of cons to these. One, of course, is, and definitely the biggest issue that comes with perfect grades, is price. Oh boy. Now, master grades were already in the expensive category, and I told you they can get up to, $80, $120. So you're probably thinking that on average these are, $80 or something, but no, 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 no. These on average are around $150, and that's for some of the cheaper ones that are older, which usually the older a kit gets, typically the cheaper it gets. Unless it becomes hard to find, then the price goes up. But perfect grades are already expensive. This mainly comes down to the fact, just like with master grades, that it takes a lot of money to make, produce, and engineer these kits, so they have to charge the customer a ton of money for these. But that's the point of these kits. They're supposed to be the top of the line. But this means that if you're someone who is a hardcore fan and you don't have a lot of money, these kits will just tear you up inside because you want them, but you might only get one, and you have to be happy with that one, because on average they start off around 150, but they go up to around 250 on average. So 150 to 250 is their base price range, but they can be even higher than that. So they can get pricey. I just want to really, really nail this point home. Don't get started in this hobby thinking you're going to start off with perfect grades because they look so good. You really have to have the money and space to deal with these. Now, other problems is that while they may have insane detail, they don't have that great of movement or articulation. Sometimes our articulation can be on par with a master grade. That's impressive for a kit of that scale. But sometimes they're more limited, usually due to the nature of the design of the suit and less of a problem with the kit itself. But it can kind of be sad because they still have inner frames like real grades and master grades. They just can't do the level of articulation. But that's okay. Perfect grades aren't really meant to be moved around a whole lot. They're meant to be epic in whatever pose you have them in and just look so breathtaking, and they're supposed to be your showstopper if you're doing a tour of all your kits or something. Like they're supposed to be a showstopper. You know, they're like the holy crap, that's so cool type of kit. There's other things as well. You know, it looks really good, but sometimes the articulation can really let you down at times. Most of the time they're pretty good. They're at least decent, but there's a few that won't be so great. And of course, their size can be a huge problem again for people who live in small places. This can be a huge problem for people because if you really like these and you live in a small place, even if you have the money, they can take up a whole lot of room, and you may not have the place to put them. You just might not have it. Like I have only one perfect grade, and he takes up the whole bottom shelf pretty much by himself. Like he has other kits around him, but he's the he's the mammoth that takes up the majority of the middle of the shelf because he's got this really large uh, base, this really large stand. So while he's an amazing kit and I absolutely love him, he's one of my favorite that I have. He is definitely very large, and he takes up a lot of, I guess you could say, retail space. Even though he's not, for retail. Obviously, I'm just saying he takes up a lot of real estate. Let's say that, a lot of real estate on your shelf. So you have to keep in mind how much real estate you have to display your kits. And if you live in a small place like I do, one perfect grade might be all you ever get, maybe two if you're lucky. But they take up a lot of space, and you have to keep that in mind for whenever you decide to get them. And one final one is that they do come, they don't come, with water slides. This is something that makes no sense to people who are experienced builders. If these are supposed to be your top of the line kits, how come they don't come with water slides? Especially with the price that you pay, you would expect that the decals that they come with are top of the line decals. So you would assume that they would have water slides, but they don't. They usually just have standard decal stickers. Or at the very best, they have the rub on style. They're not terrible by any means, but it's just weird that perfect grades would have some of the the cheaper style of decals. I guess it might be to try and lower their price just a little, but in the end, you're still paying over 300 sometimes dollars for these kits. So if that's the case, why not just go ahead and throw in water slides? What's it going to charge me, an extra $20? I'm already paying 300. Who cares? Like it's whatever. But they don't do it most of the time. I think maybe only one perfect grade that I can think of might come with water slides, but I could be wrong. Like as far as I know, they don't come with them. And they usually do have a few foil stickers. Pretty much all kits will have a foil sticker, but by this point, it's pretty much, again, just for the eyes. And the last con for perfect grades would also be lack of choice. So you can tell that basically the better the kit is, the less choices you have. And perfect grades, even though they came out, I believe, in like 98 or 97, They might be the best in quality when it comes to detail and stuff, but they don't have a huge array of choices. They're very limited for being the top of the line kits. Like, I think, and not counting variants of like different colors of the same suit, but if you just go through and look at every single different perfect grade, there's like maybe 20, and that's not a whole lot to choose from. So just keep that in mind as well. Alright, that's pretty much it for the video. Thank you, appreciate you watching. Hit the like button, subscribe, notification bell, share the video, and leave a comment and tell me what you believe your personal problem is for each grade, or one of your favorite pros to each grade. Thank you for watching.